What if I told you that you are merely version 2.0? Imagine for a moment that humanity, as we know it today, is actually a second attempt, and a flawed one at that, by our creators. Have you ever wondered why our nature is so riddled with strange contradictions? Why are our bodies so fragile, so prone to disease and decay, yet our minds are capable of unraveling the very secrets of the cosmos? Today, we are diving into one of the most ancient, captivating, and perhaps terrifying mysteries of our planet. We are journeying back to a distant era when, according to ancient texts, true gods walked the earth. I promise you a story that will challenge everything you think you know about our past. It is a tale of how powerful beings from the heavens engineered us, and then, in a fit of primal fear, tried to wipe their own creation off the face of the earth. It sounds like a paradox, doesn't it? Why would a brilliant creator seek to pulverize their most successful project? Many naively believe we are the pinnacle of natural evolution. But the world's oldest clay tablets tell a darker, far more gripping truth of genetic experimentation and global cataclysms. So, settle in, get comfortable, pull up a warm blanket, close your eyes, and let my voice guide you through the millennia. As the echoes of the ages wash over you, I want you to think, do you believe these ancient myths are just the fantasies of our ancestors? Or do these texts hold the coded, forbidden history of our true origin? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. To truly grasp this story, we must travel back to ancient Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. It was there, beneath the scorching sands of modern-day Iraq, that archaeologists unearthed tens of thousands of kiln-fired clay tablets. Etched into these fragile artifacts is the cuneiform script of the Sumerians, a people whose sophisticated knowledge of astronomy and mathematics still baffles scholars today. At the heart of these epic chronicles are the Anunnaki. Their name roughly translates to those who descended from the heavens. According to the texts, they were a highly advanced race of powerful beings who arrived here from deep space. Our story follows two powerful brothers locked in a timeless rivalry. First, there is Enlil, the stern, pragmatic ruler of Earth and commander of the heavenly forces. Then there is Enki, a brilliant and cunning scientist, the lord of the waters, and the greatest geneticist of that forgotten age. Their fractured relationship, fueled by competition and conflicting visions for the world, would become the stage for the greatest drama in our planet's history. A drama of life's beginning, of betrayal, mass extinction, and an incredible rebirth. Close your eyes for a moment and travel back with me to a time hundreds of thousands of years ago. Earth was a different world then, pristine, silent, and overflowing with untouched natural wealth. It was this wealth, or more specifically, pure gold, that brought the Anunnaki to our shores. According to ancient Sumerian tablets, their home world, Nibiru, required vast amounts of this metal to repair its thinning atmosphere by dispersing gold dust into the skies. But the extraction process proved to be an agonizing ordeal. Picture this: colossal, advanced, godlike beings forced to descend into the suffocating darkness of treacherous mines. The most grueling, back-breaking labor fell to a lower class of deities known as the Igigi. For thousands of years, they toiled without rest. Day after day, century after century, they swung heavy pickaxes, shattering stone in the deep mines of southern Africa. I want to debunk a common misconception here. Many people imagine the ancient gods doing nothing but lounging on clouds, feasting on ambrosia, and sipping nectar. In reality, the oldest Sumerian records paint a far grimmer picture, an era of relentless, bone-deep physical toil. They felt the weight of exhaustion, the ache in their muscles, and the searing heat, just as any of us would had we been thrust into those same brutal conditions. As you might expect, even the patience of the gods has its limits. For centuries, the lesser gods, the Igigi, had endured backbreaking toil, and with every passing age, the tension grew. Then, in the dead of night, they finally snapped. They cast their heavy picks and shovels into the flames, sparking a rebellion unlike anything the world had ever seen. A massive crowd of gods, caked in dust and sweat, surrounded the shimmering palace of Enlil, the supreme ruler of the earth. Their voices roared through the darkness, demanding an end to the grueling, soul-crushing labor in the mines. The situation was reaching a breaking point. Furious, Enlil was ready to unleash his full power and wipe the rebels from existence, but his brother Enki, the wise and visionary scientist, stepped in. At an emergency council of the gods, Enki proposed a radical, world-changing solution. "Why wage war against our own brothers?" he asked calmly. "Instead, let us create a primitive worker, someone to shoulder this heavy burden for us." His idea was to design a biological machine, a being intelligent enough to follow orders, yet submissive enough to toil in the dark mines without complaint. The Igigi met the proposal with a roar of relief and approval, and so, on that fateful night, the historic decision was made to create the very first version of humanity. The creation of mankind was far from the instantaneous, magical snap of the fingers described in later religious texts. Instead, Enki, alongside the master healer and geneticist Ninma, retreated into a high-tech laboratory. This secret facility was hidden within the mystical Abzu, located deep underground in southern Africa. Ancient Sumerian tablets detail a long and painstaking process that is hauntingly similar to modern genetic engineering and cloning. These scientist gods chose to fuse the essence of the earth, the very clay or dust of the ground, with the divine blood and DNA of an Anunnaki. The sacrificial subject for this experiment was Kingu, a god who had been one of the primary instigators of the rebellion. His blood, which carried the spark of higher intelligence and a complex divine genome, was meticulously grafted onto a compatible earthly biological host. Imagine the scene, a shadowy laboratory lit only by the rhythmic pulse of machinery where an entirely new form of life was being forged inside experimental vessels. The gods spent ages fine-tuning the proportions, running trial after trial. The initial results were failures. The creatures were born weak or deformed, unable to even hold a pickaxe, let alone perform heavy labor. But Enki was relentless. He was obsessed with the idea of engineering the perfect, tireless worker. And after countless errors and setbacks, they finally struck that elusive, perfect genetic balance. And so, after months of relentless effort, he finally emerged, the very first successful biological specimen, whom his creators proudly named Adamu. He was the crowning achievement of Enki's visionary genetic engineering. Ancient records describe Adamu as incredibly powerful and resilient, perfectly attuned to Earth's gravity and its unforgiving climate. The gods rejoiced like children receiving a long-awaited gift. The goddess Ninmah lifted the newborn in her arms and cried out, her voice echoing through the laboratory, "My own hands have wrought this miracle." It is important to understand that this first version of humanity was a flawless masterpiece of genetic art. Physically, they were far more imposing than we are today, larger, sturdier, and vastly more powerful. Their bodies were specifically engineered for grueling, back-breaking labor under the most extreme conditions. They were strangers to disease. Their immune systems were infallible, neutralizing any infection instantly. In essence, these first humans were biologically immortal. While they could perish from physical trauma or accidents in the mines, their cells did not degrade. They did not age the way we do. They were the perfect, obedient, and highly efficient labor force, immediately dispatched to the gold mines and vast fields to provide the gods with endless resources. It seemed at last that the great problem had been solved once and for all. Yet, within this seemingly flawless genetic blueprint lay a hidden and ultimately fatal flaw. The first generation of humans, these powerful, tireless biological machines, lacked the natural ability to reproduce. Their creators had designed them much like the mules of modern agriculture, incredibly strong and resilient, yet entirely sterile. Because of this, every new worker for the mines had to be engineered artificially in specialized incubators, overseen by the goddesses of birth. This cloning process was painstakingly slow and complex, requiring the constant hands-on involvement of the Anunnaki themselves. Meanwhile, the demand for gold grew relentlessly. As the mines reached deeper into the Earth's crust, the need for labor exploded. Thousands upon thousands of new workers were required to keep the operation running. The birth goddesses simply couldn't keep up with such a massive production scale. A critical labor shortage gripped the planet, threatening to bring resource extraction to a total standstill. It was then that the brilliant scientist Enki made a bold and dangerous choice, one that would irrevocably alter the course of history. Defying the direct orders of his brother, the supreme ruler Enlil, Enki secretly modified the human genetic code. He decided to give humanity the ultimate gift, the power to reproduce on their own. Many modern researchers draw a direct parallel between this pivotal turning point and the biblical story of the Garden of Eden, the cunning serpent and the forbidden tree of knowledge. Enki, often represented in ancient traditions as a wise, knowledge-bearing serpent, secretly gifted humanity the ultimate secret of procreation. Infiltrating the laboratory, he subtly modified their DNA, activating the dormant genes that finally allowed humans to have children of their own. For the supreme ruler, Enlil, the news was a crushing blow. The Lord of the earth was in a blind rage over this act of defiance. As a seasoned leader, he understood the gravity of the threat. Beings with immense physical strength, near godlike longevity, and now an uncontrollable ability to multiply, could soon become impossible to govern. But the process of natural reproduction was already irreversible. These modified humans were immediately cast out of the gods' high-tech laboratories, remembered in later myths as Eden, and driven into the wilderness. No longer just workers in the mines of the Anunnaki, they were now forced to toil for their own food by the sweat of their brow while raising their offspring. Thus, humanity began its long, independent journey, a path that would soon lead the world toward a global catastrophe. Gifted with the extraordinary power of reproduction, humanity spread across the planet like wildfire. Let's put this staggering growth into perspective. Imagine beings immune to all earthly diseases, living vibrant lives for hundreds, even thousands of years, and possessed of immense physical strength. When these beings began to procreate, their offspring matured with startling speed, quickly founding massive families of their own. On a global scale, it was a demographic explosion of colossal proportions. Within just a few millennia of their release from the laboratories, the Earth was teeming with the first version of humanity. They built sprawling, boisterous cities, cleared ancient forests, and tilled endless fields to feed their hunger. They were loud, exuberant, and at times violently territorial. Their numbers had surged completely beyond the control of the gods. The obedient slaves who once toiled in the mines had transformed into a formidable, surging, and unpredictable tide. Watching this chaotic spectacle from his celestial palace, Enlil felt a cold, gnawing dread. In this endlessly multiplying swarm, he saw a lethal threat to the Anunnaki themselves. He knew that if these giants ever realized their collective strength, they could ignite a rebellion far more devastating than the ancient revolt of the lesser gods, an uprising the gods might not be able to stop. Strangely enough, Enlil's greatest and most unbearable grievance wasn't human rebellion, but the constant, uncontrollable noise rising from their settlements. In ancient Sumerian texts, specifically the famous Epic of Atrahasis, it is explicitly stated that the clamor of a booming population became intolerable to the sensitive ears of the gods. As the text puts it, the land bellowed like a wild bull. Enlil repeatedly complained to the Great Council that the endless shouting and frantic bustle had robbed him of his peace and, more importantly, his sleep. To us, this might sound almost comical, like a grumpy neighbor complaining about loud music through a thin wall. But when you are a planetary ruler with absolute power, such an annoyance carries fatal consequences. Let's debunk a popular myth right here. The idea that the gods punished ancient humanity for their sins or moral failings. Sumerian texts are surprisingly cold, pragmatic, and devoid of such illusions. There is no concept of original sin as we know it. Enlil didn't want to wipe out the first humans because they were evil or wicked. He wanted them gone simply because they were keeping him awake. To him, humans had become nothing more than pests, like cockroaches that had multiplied too quickly in his beautiful home. And as the master of that house, he decided it was time for a cold-blooded extermination. So, let's take a closer look at exactly how the gods, in their fury, sought to solve the crisis of overpopulation. It's important to note that Enlil didn't jump straight to the radical idea of total annihilation. At first, acting as a calculating ruler, he opted for more targeted measures to thin the human herd. His first strike was a devastating unknown plague. He commanded Namtar, the dread god of death and disease, to unleash a lethal pestilence upon the earth. Imagine the scene, an invisible, toxic cloud of death slowly settling over the bustling, crowded cities. These first-generation humans, who had never known sickness thanks to their perfect immunity, began to drop where they stood, littering the dusty streets. Panic took hold instantly. The vibrant noise of feasting and celebration was silenced, replaced by the wretched moans of the dying and the inconsolable wailing of the survivors. As tens of thousands were cut down every day, great cities were rapidly hollowed out. From the heavens, Enlil watched with grim satisfaction as a long-awaited silence finally began to return to the world. It seemed his cold, pragmatic plan was working perfectly, and that the human population would soon be reduced to a manageable minimum. But in his cold calculations, the supreme ruler had overlooked one crucial factor: the Creator's profound love for his own creation. Wise Enki, the creator of mankind, could not stand by and watch his beloved creations perish in agony, not after investing so much of his own effort and essence into them. Defying his brother's decree, he secretly reached out to Atrahasis, one of the wisest and most devoted men of that age, through a telepathic vision. Enki gave him a set of instructions that were as precise as they were unexpected. He told the people to immediately stop praying to the pantheon and to cease all sacrifices to Enlil. Instead, they were to focus every prayer, gift, and rich offering on a single deity, Namtar, the Lord of Disease. The plan was a stroke of genius. When the grim god of death found himself showered with such unprecedented honor and devotion, his cold heart softened. Intoxicated by the attention, he stayed his hand and ended the epidemic. The survivors began to heal, their strength returning almost overnight. There is, however, a fascinating theory behind this ancient tale. Many modern researchers believe this myth isn't about a magical ritual at all, but rather the first recorded instance of advanced medical intervention. It's possible Enki was teaching them the use of potent medicinal herbs or the importance of a strict sanitary quarantine. To an ancient, uneducated population, such effective treatment would have looked like the mystical appeasement of a god. Regardless of the means, the trick worked. This early version of humanity survived and soon began to multiply once more, their numbers swelling until that same unbearable noise began to echo across the world again. Upon learning that mankind had not only survived, but was once again flourishing, their celebrations growing even louder and more boisterous, Enlil was consumed by a blind, unspeakable rage. He realized then that subtle measures like plagues and viruses would never be enough to break such a resilient race. The High Lord decided to strike a second time, delivering a blow far more devastating and absolute. He commanded the god of storms to hold back the rains and seal the springs of heaven. A great, withering drought descended upon the once prosperous lands. Ancient texts describe a sky that turned to glowing copper and an earth that became hard as iron. Mighty rivers shriveled into mere trickles, and bountiful harvests perished where they stood under a relentless sun. An all-consuming famine gripped the planet. The clay tablets paint a chilling picture of those dark times. People became so gaunt and haggard that their parched faces resembled sun-baked bricks. They wandered aimlessly through the barrens in search of any scrap of food, while the bonds of family crumbled in a brutal animalistic struggle for survival. Watching this misery, Enlil felt certain that he would finally break the spirit of humanity once and for all. A slow, agonizing starvation would finish what the swiftness of disease could not. To ensure his victory, he imposed a total blockade, forbidding any god, under pain of death, From offering the mortals so much as a morsel of food or a single drop of water. Once again, the first iteration of humanity proved to be a genetic masterpiece. They were incredibly, almost terrifyingly, resilient. While famine had decimated their numbers, the concept of extinction never seemed to cross their minds. The raw survival instinct, hard-coded into them by Enki, drove them to evolve at a frantic pace, forcing them to unite and adapt to their new, hellish reality. Instead of waiting for mercy from the cruel heavens above, they carved deep into the earth, fracturing bedrock to reach water. They became masters of the deep, tapping into hidden underground springs to sustain their meager plots through primitive drip irrigation. They learned to hoard every single grain, subsisting on bitter roots and wild herbs, scavenging for life in the stagnant pools of what were once mighty rivers. This uncanny ability to thrive in the face of death came as a profound shock to the arrogant Anunnaki. These early humans possessed a resilience of spirit and body that unsettled Lord Enlil even more than their incessant noise ever had. He realized with horror that he hadn't just authorized the creation of mindless slaves, but a race of unstoppable survivors. With every new trial, they only grew sharper, bolder, and more enduring. It became clear that half measures and localized disasters would no longer suffice. He needed a final solution. Tensions between Earth and the heavens had reached a breaking point. It was at this critical moment that nature itself intervened. Or perhaps, as alternative historians suggest, it was the relentless clockwork of cosmic cycles. The gods' leading astronomers brought a terrifying report to Enlil. A celestial event of staggering proportions was hurtling toward Earth. It was the return of their home world, Nibiru. Its massive gravitational pull had begun to destabilize the polar ice caps, pushing the planet toward a catastrophic tipping point. With their advanced scientific knowledge, the Anunnaki quickly calculated the consequences. An unprecedented global disaster was imminent. A multi-mile-high tidal wave that would scour the planet clean of all life. In that moment, Enlil made the coldest, most ruthless decision in history. Calling a grand council of the gods, he proposed a single, chilling course of action: silence. He forbade anyone from warning mankind. Let the blind forces of nature finish what plague and famine could not. Let this inevitable deluge erase this first version of humanity, too noisy, too clever, and far too resilient, once and for all. He chose to abandon billions of unsuspecting souls to their fate, leaving the ocean to swallow them whole. At the emergency council of the gods, a fierce and bitter debate erupted, threatening to spark an all-out war between brothers. Risking everything, Enki stood alone, fighting passionately for his greatest creation. He spoke of humanity's worth and the back-breaking labor they had endured to shape the world and mine its gold, arguing that they had earned their right to exist. But the other gods were consumed by fear, terrified of mankind's rising power and exhausted by their endless turmoil. Cowardly, they fell in line behind Enlil's plan. To ensure there would be no betrayal, Enlil forced everyone present to swear a sacred, unbreakable oath of silence. Not a single soul was to be warned of the wall of water racing toward the shore. With the pact sealed, the gods scrambled to prepare their shimmering sky chariots and orbital stations, ready to flee the surface and watch the destruction from the safety of high orbit. With a heavy heart, Enki took the oath with the rest, masking his defiance behind a veil of submission. On the surface, he seemed to have yielded to the majority, but deep within his rebellious soul, he was already weaving a brilliant plan. He simply could not allow his finest genetic masterpiece to be erased by the cold, dark waters of the great deluge. How did the wily Enki circumvent the gods' solemn oath of silence without triggering their divine wrath? He found a stroke of legal genius, a truly elegant loophole. Under the shroud of night, Enki descended to earth, making his way to a humble reed hut. Inside slept Ziusudra, the wise ruler of Shuruppak and Enki's most faithful priest. In later traditions, he is known as Utnapishtim, but to most of us, he is best known by his biblical name, Noah. To speak directly to the man would have been a blatant violation of Enki's vow. Instead, he stood against the side of the house and addressed the wall itself. "Reed wall, listen closely to my words," he whispered into the darkness. "Tear down your house and build a great ship. Forsake your possessions, leave your wealth behind, and save your life." This single moment carries an incredible historical weight. Here is a powerful God whispering the ultimate secret of survival through a thin reed partition, desperately hoping the mortal on the other side is clever enough to wake up and grasp the hidden meaning. And the wise Ziusudra did understand. Waking in a cold sweat, he heard the terrifying warning: a great flood was coming, destined to wipe all life from the face of the earth. The secret mission to preserve the planet's seeds of life had begun, and the clock was already ticking. Whispering through the wall, Enki delivered a set of remarkably detailed engineering blueprints to his priest. This wasn't just a design. It was a master plan for a massive vessel. It's important to understand that this wasn't some simple wooden boat or a raft. This was a sophisticated, airtight submersible, an ark built to withstand the crushing force of massive waves and remain submerged beneath the churning tides for as long as necessary. Ziusudra moved quickly. He recruited the finest craftsmen in the city, paying them handsomely, and under the guise of constructing a new temple, began the secret, hurried assembly of this strange sealed vessel. Now here's an intriguing detail we shouldn't overlook. The ark wasn't meant to save humanity's first perfect generation. Its sole purpose was to safeguard the fundamental genetic blueprints of life itself. Some modern interpretations of the Sumerian tablets suggest a radical idea. It wasn't just a matter of loading pairs of full-sized animals onto the ship. Instead, they carried what the ancient texts call the seed of all living things. This could very well refer to an ancient high-tech DNA bank. Vials of preserved genetic material from Earth's flora and fauna, provided by Enki himself. The god entrusted Ziusudra with this essence of life, so that once the floods receded, the planet's ravaged ecosystem could be artificially reconstructed. Once this remarkable survival craft was finally complete, Ziusudra hurried his family, his trusted craftsmen, and the vital samples on board. With supplies secured, he sealed the heavy pitch-covered hatches from the inside and waited for the world to end. And so, the day of reckoning, long foretold, finally arrived. The vibrant sky vanished into a deep, suffocating black as a ferocious gale erupted, tearing ancient trees from the earth by their roots. Ancient chronicles speak of the terror that followed as brilliant daylight was swallowed by an absolute impenetrable night. Then came the water, a gargantuan roaring wall of ocean reaching toward the very heavens, crashed down upon the defenseless continents with a deafening roar. Massive ice caps surged into the sea, triggering a tsunami of truly global proportions. The magnificent cities of the first age of man, their golden fields, sacred temples, and grand monuments, were pulverized and swept away in mere moments. Millions fled in blind, primal terror, scrambling for the highest peaks, but the relentless tide rose to swallow every last soul. The devastation was so absolute that even its architects, the gods, watching safely from their vessels in orbit, recoiled in genuine horror. The goddess Ninmah wept in a fit of hysteria, watching her perfect creations dissolve into nothing more than floating, lifeless clay. The mighty Anunnaki huddled together like beaten dogs, finally grasping the monstrous scale of their work. By their own hands they had extinguished a flourishing world. For days and nights on end, a great global tempest raged in the darkness. It was only then that the waters finally began to steady and slowly recede. Ziusudra's sealed ark had been tossed about like a mere scrap of wood by massive waves, yet it held fast, weathering the terrible ordeal. As the floodwaters dropped, the vessel came to rest gently on the peak of one of the few mountains left standing. With a sigh of relief, Ziusudra forced open the heavy hatch and released birds into the sky, desperate for any sign of dry land. Stepping out onto the sodden, silt-covered earth of a broken world, his first act was to build a roaring fire. He offered a sacrifice of the animals he had saved, a heartfelt thanks to the heavens for his family's miraculous survival. It's at this point that the ancient tablets take a truly remarkable and somewhat comical turn. The Sumerian texts describe how the gods had been starving up in their cold orbit, deprived of their usual offerings. Catching the sweet scent of roasting meat, they swarmed the altar like, and I quote, hungry flies. They were so overjoyed to smell food again that they completely cast aside their divine dignity. But when the high god Enlil arrived and saw that humans had actually survived, his mood shifted instantly to a black rage. Who had dared to break the sacred oath? How had the seed of mankind escaped the end of the world? In his fury, he was ready to strike Ziusudra down then and there. Then wise Enki stepped forward, placing himself between the terrified survivors and his brother's wrath. With calm dignity, he looked into Enlil's furious eyes and confessed it was he who had warned mankind of the coming storm. Yet Enki insisted he hadn't broken his sacred oath. He had merely spoken to the reeds of a wall, and if the man was clever enough to overhear and save himself, that was his own doing. Appealing to Enlil's cold pragmatism, Enki gestured toward the desolate wasteland around them. "Look at this world," he said. "These people are the last spark of life on earth. Without them, the planet is nothing but a silent grave. If you destroy them now, who will till the soil or mine the gold? We ourselves would wither away in this emptiness." Enlil's fury began to wane as he surveyed the ruin he had caused. He could not deny the harsh logic in his brother's words. Approaching Ziusudra and his wife, the great lord touched their brows. As a gesture of peace, he granted them eternal life, elevating them to the rank of the gods. But this did not mean Enlil would allow humanity to flourish unchecked again. While he permitted them to survive and repopulate the earth, he gave Enki a final, absolute ultimatum. This new generation was never to become as powerful, as resilient, or as immortal as the world that had been washed away by the flood. And so it was, amidst the sodden ruins of the old world, that humanity 2.0 was hastily engineered in secret laboratories. That version is us. The brilliant Enki and the healer Ninma returned to their intricate genetic work, but this time with a far darker intent, to deliberately weaken the human race. Our natural lifespan was drastically slashed, reduced from centuries to a mere handful of decades. Deep within our rewritten genome, they hardwired the mechanisms of inevitable decay and a profound vulnerability to a countless array of lethal diseases. Ancient myths tell of gods who fashioned demons of sickness and infertility to keep our population in check through suffering and loss. Our direct link to our makers was severed, and the true story of our celestial origins was scrubbed from the collective memory of generations. All we were left with were the hazy fragments of myth, grim legends of a great flood, and nursery tales. We emerged physically fragile, our lives brief and defined by struggle. Yet herein lies the paradox. In exchange for our strength, we gained something far more profound. It was through this newfound mortality, this awareness of our own end, that we learned to truly cherish every fleeting moment. This is the source of our relentless drive for art, our thirst for science, and our obsession with understanding the cosmos. Yes, we are merely the descendants of survivors, trapped in frail mortal shells, but we remain utterly boundless in our eternal longing to one day return to the stars. This is the haunting, dark, yet deeply inspiring story hidden within the cuneiform tablets of ancient Sumer. It tells of the first version of humanity, physically perfect beings who were ruthlessly wiped from the face of the earth by their own creators, driven by a fear of their rising power and mere inconvenience. We, the modern humans, are the result of a complex genetic compromise. We were made fragile, susceptible to disease, and bound by a fleeting lifespan. Yet, it is within this very vulnerability that our greatest, most indomitable strength lies. We continue to live, love, create, and evolve, despite the harsh limitations imposed upon us millennia ago. This ancient tale offers a fresh perspective on the intricate nature of humanity and our unique place in this vast universe. Thank you for spending this quiet night with me, diving into the deep secrets of our distant past. I truly hope this story helped you let go of the day's worries and provided peace and inspiration for your dreams. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more legends like this, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, and share this with anyone who loves solving historical mysteries before sleep. And before you drift off, leave a comment with your thoughts on one question. Which trait inherited from the Anunnaki do you think defines modern humanity most? Our thirst for boundless creation or our drive for cold destruction? Good night, sweet dreams, and I look forward to seeing you again as we explore the world of mysteries.